Ladies and gentlemen, good morning or good afternoon, wherever you're coming from. I'm Ken O'Neill, and we're talking today with the commissioner of the West Coast League, and that would be Rob Neyer. And Rob, welcome to the program.
Great to be here, Ken. Thank you.
Now, according to our thing, it says that you are in the Pacific Northwest, and this year you're having your 16th team. 12th team, the Ridgefield Raptors.
Yep.
So now you will have 12 teams in the league, two 6-teams divisions. Tell us about the history of West Coast, because I believe it started in 2005.
It did start in 2005, and we actually had a different name at that point, which I've forgotten, believe it or not. I've only been the commissioner for a year, so I haven't quite internalized all of our history. In fact, we should write sort of a league history for people like me who come aboard and want to get up to speed. And I guess that exists someplace, but I don't remember the initial name of the league, but at some point within 2 or 3 years, we changed the name to the West Coast League, and have had, we have a few teams that have been there from the very beginning. The Wenatchee Apple Sox, for example, I think are one of those teams. The Corvallis Knights have been around in one form or another for quite a while. This year we were 11 teams last year, 12 teams this year, with the Ridgefield Raptors joining, and I think there's room for growth.
Now, this league is large as far as land. I mean, you have teams in Canada and you have teams in the U.S. How does the travel work for these teams in the summer?
Well, the travel it's akin to what it has probably been like in the Pioneer League, for example, or the Texas League, where there are some truly long bus trips. I mean, we range from Corvallis and Bend, which are about halfway down Oregon, essentially, all the way up to Kelowna in British Columbia, which is about, roughly speaking, I have not made the drive, I've only flown, but it's about an hour and a half or two north of the border, essentially north of Spokane, Washington. In British Columbia. That is a long bus ride. So one of the things that we offer in our league that really no other collegiate summer league offers is essentially a professional experience when it comes to the travel. This is the same sort of travel that players are going to be doing if they wind up playing professionally in their first year or two in the minor leagues. You're right, there's no other league, collegiate summer league, that has anything like our footprint. I think the nearest might be the Northwoods League, which has teams that up in, I think this year they have a team in Thunder Bay, Ontario, and they have a team in, I believe, Bismarck, North Dakota, and then one down in Indiana. So theoretically, you could have the same sort of travel there, but because they have 22 teams, so they don't play everybody every year. So I think in terms of travel and the geographic footprint, at least as it impacts the travel, there's really no other league that can compare to what we have in our league.
Now, let me say that we are speaking with the West Coast League Commissioner, Rob Neyer. Now, Rob, according to statistics, you have 62.1% of your players coming from Division I programs and 15.6% coming from P5 or G5 conferences. How do you recruit for your particular league? Is it only people from your area, or is it throughout the country? How do you recruit?
Well, every team is different, first of all. There's no sort of league clearinghouse. It would be interesting to have a group of 400 players and then have everybody just sort of choose in a sort of draft or something, but it doesn't work that way at all. Essentially, the recruiting process is almost completely based on existing relationships between teams in our league and the college coaches. You could think of it as sort of a pipeline. Maybe a coach in Corvallis, for example. Brooke Knight is the head coach in Corvallis. He's been doing this for a long time, been incredibly successful. He has built relationships with any number of college coaches. And essentially, the player, I want to be careful how I phrase this, no player is going to go where he doesn't want to go, but to some degree, to some significant degree, a player is going to come to one of our teams because of a relationship between his college coach and our team in our league. Could be our head coach quite often, could be a general manager or even an owner of one of our teams. Geographically speaking, I would say the lion's share of our players do come from, if not the Northwest, certainly the West. We get a lot of players from Pac-12 schools, including, of course, in California and Arizona. That said, we have players from all over the country. I know this year for some reason, just the other day, I noticed we have a player from Tulane who's going to be in our league this season. And I only mentioned Tulane not because they're the only one, just because that, for some reason, that school happened to pop into my head when I was looking at a roster. But so we do draw from all over the country, but because of the relationships tend to be geographical. Most of our players, I suspect, do come from the Northwest and California and Utah, places like that.
Now, I saw too in here that when the players come, they have host families.
That's right.
So you guys will recruit people for them to stay with.
That's right. In fact, it's, again, going back to the travel, this is the same model that is used in the low minor leagues. For example, even in the Northwest League, which is most people are well familiar with the Northwest League. The Hillsboro Hops are right here near Portland. The Everett Aqua Sox, north of Seattle, Spokane. The Northwest League teams basically all run on the same model. With host families who tend to come back year after year and will host one or two players. In Canada, they call them billet families. Basically the same concept. So yes, it is obviously costs are lower for the teams if they don't have to pay for lodgings when the players are at home. But it's also, I think the teams have found that it's a great way to build community support. We have families who have been doing this for the entire history of the West Coast League, which, as you know, stretches back now almost, I guess this is our 15th season, basically. So, and we have families who have been doing this in Wenatchee and Corvallis and Bend, going back the entire history.
Now you have a 54-game schedule.
That's right.
Which a lot of people prefer, and some want a little bit less than that. Do you have a problem that towards the end of your season, the coaches or college coaches want the kids to come home early or don't want it? Is there any kind of stuff like that going on?
There absolutely is always going to be that dynamic. And it isn't so much that the college coaches want their players coming back unless their school year is beginning, and that happens. I think where you do run into issues is with coaches who don't want their pitchers throwing X number of innings.
Right.
In fact, most of the pitchers come to our teams with a number provided by their coaches. So yes, you can run out of pitchers, and you can also run out of players just because you have players by mid-August, late August, who have to get back because their schools are starting on August 18th or 20th or whatever it might be. So yes, you also run into the same issue at the beginning of the season. There are, as you know, our season starts this year on June 4th. Well, the College World Series is still being played, and we have a number of players from Pac-12 conferences in particular who are going to be playing baseball with their school when our season starts. So there is no perfect schedule, unless, I mean, for the players, I suppose a perfect schedule would begin on June 10th or something and end on August 8th. And there are a number of collegiate summer leagues who play much shorter schedules than we do, 30, 35, 40 games. That said, to be economically feasible and provide the experience that we want to provide, especially when we talk about all the travel that we have in our league, I think that to be economically feasible, we need to have a longer schedule. We can't play a 30-game schedule and have that be practical for the team. So, the compromise essentially that we've hit upon is this 54-game schedule that starts in basically early June and goes through the middle of August, even later if you count the playoffs. But yes, when you get toward the end of the season, especially if you're in the playoffs, some teams are going to start losing players. Some teams not. It just sort of depends on how they set their roster up, which schools their players have come from. But absolutely, you've got roster issues at the start and at the end of the season, or at least potential roster issues.
Now, here's what I really want to know. What is the deal with the Portland Pickles? Are they good in the league? Or they have a lot of attendance? Because I love the Pickles.
The Pickles last season was actually their first year in the West Coast League. They had played the season before that in a different league, and last year they transferred over to our league. And I live in Portland. I actually have played baseball in their ballpark. So I have a real sort of sentimental attachment to them. That said, I have to remain somewhat objective. I don't pull for Pickles to win. I don't pull for anybody to win. From my perspective, not being able to look at their ledgers, they seem to me to be a rousing success. They were incredibly successful in their first season in the league. On the field, they had either, I believe, the best record or the second best record in the league. They were knocked out in the league semifinals by the eventual champions, the Corvallis Knights, in the ninth inning of the deciding game of their playoff series. But they had a tremendous amount of talent last season. They did a great job putting their roster together. I expect that they'll do the same thing this season. They've got a great ownership group. Their games, especially their night games, are essentially a 3-hour party. They have done a fantastic job creating an atmosphere in that ballpark, really out of whole cloth. 2 years ago, nobody saw this coming. Nobody really even had an idea that a team from the West Coast League could move into this ballpark in Southeast Portland and create this environment. But everybody who goes to a game there, again, especially a night game, when the beer is flowing, they are amazed by the energy in that ballpark for their games. And I think they're going to have a great season again.
Well, according to what I have here, you have some old minor league ballparks that you guys are playing in.
We do.
I'm always fascinated by the ballparks because some of the minor league ballparks are really, really nice ballparks.
They really are, and they have and I'm an aficionado. That's probably the wrong word because it presumes an air of a level of expertise that I don't have, but I have an affection for old ballparks. If it was built before 1960 or 70, I'm probably going to love it. And we have I don't recall the number of teams that play in ex minor league parks, but we do have a couple of old gems. That's for sure. We have our Bend team plays in a ballpark that's been around, I suspect, since the 1930s. I think it was a works in progress administration ballpark, like so many of the old ballparks were. And there's another old minor league ballpark. The Wenatchee Apple Sox play in a ballpark that's been around since the 1930s, I believe, as well. And both of those were home for many years to minor league teams. The Wenatchee team, for example, their history goes back to either the 1930s or the early 40s. And they had a team in I believe the Western International League and then the Northwest League for decades. Great history. So yes, and all the ballparks have something to recommend them. Do I have my favorites? Yes. Do I have my least favorites? Yes. Am I going to tell you what my least favorite ballpark in the league is? No.
Well,
having been to all 12 of them, they all have their charms. They all have something to recommend them. Almost all of them have tremendous scenery. One of the things that I mean, it's a small thing maybe, but if I were just someone who wanted to travel around the country going to baseball games, I would love to visit some of our ballparks, really all of them, because all of them boast tremendous scenery. Even if the ballpark per se isn't fantastic, all you have to do is look beyond the fences, or maybe take a 10-minute drive and you're in the mountains or the forest or a national park. It really is an amazing league in that regard.
Let me say to everyone that we're talking with the West Coast League Commissioner, Rob Neyer. And Rob, I have a couple of more questions, kind of silly ones. I saw something about that you allow composite wood bats.
Yes.
What exactly is that for people who don't know?
That's a good question. I think that our mandate is essentially to use bats that give one that provide the sounds that we all grew up loving of the wood bats. I mean, when I was a little kid, I used wood bats because I liked the way they sounded. Now, it didn't help my hitting. It probably made me quite a bit worse, but I just liked the way they sounded and the way they felt. So I used wood bats. So I sort of have just as I have an affection for old ballparks, I definitely prefer the sound of wood bats. But for us, it's really more about the development part. The idea is that we are giving our players a chance to perform, to travel, and to use the bats that they would be using in professional baseball. So many of our players do use wood bats. Some of our players also use what we call composite bats, which are not made out of wood. They are composite. I think there's some wood. I actually am not an expert when it comes to composite bats. But performance-wise, in terms of the way the bat sounds when you use it, and also the way the ball jumps off the bat, it is designed to mimic a wood bat. So, which is, as you know, completely different from the metal bats that are used in college baseball, or at least the ones that were used until a few years ago when they put on some pretty significant restrictions. But essentially, the sounds that you're going to hear and the travel off the bat, whether it's the wood bat or the composite bat, are going to mimic what you would see in professional baseball. The big advantage of the composite bats, which are pretty expensive, is that they don't break. And there's a cost savings there, obviously, for the teams. So that's the biggest reason why the teams that do use the composite bats use them.
Because I could never get used to the ping.
Right.
No,
I wouldn't say it spoils college baseball for me, but it certainly makes it a little less enjoyable. The composite bats give you the sound you want to hear, but you can go through a whole season. One team could use 6 composite bats in an entire season because they don't break.
Wow, that's pretty good. And the last one is you have what about the slaughter rule? Do you have one of those? An extra inning rule? Because I know in extra innings now, some groups are putting a guy on second base in the 10th inning, and then you go.
No, we don't use any of those. For the most part, our rule book mirrors. I shouldn't say it mirrors. Our rule book is the NCAA rule book, and the NCAA does not, I believe, use a slaughter rule in baseball, and they don't have the extra innings changes either that they've got in professional baseball. So we do have a few differences between our rule book and the NCAA rule book, but essentially, the bats being one of the biggest, it's probably the biggest one. But for the most part, our umpires, our coaches, they show up at the ballpark with the NCAA rule book and then a few extra pages that we add where we differ. But essentially, the in-game experience is going to be the same as if you're at a college game.
Well, Rob, I really appreciate you coming on and doing the interview. We wish you well in your league. We're going to keep up with you, and hopefully we'll be able to talk with you again.
Oh, I'd love to do it. We always have new stuff to talk about, so thanks for having me.
All right.